Good evening, everyone. Chip Cooper for FTC Guardian and my partner, Alan Cutts. Here we are, the first Hangout in the month of May 2019. And I'm still where I usually am, but Alan's on the road, and he's not on the road in sort of a business sort of way, even though he's participating in this call. He's on his vacation in South Carolina at the beach. So I'll let him tell you a little bit about what he's up to. I think, my situation, same old, same old. Alan's got more to tell than I do, so I'm going to turn it over to him for a minute or so.
Actually, we booked this as a vacation. It's been the worst vacation we've had in forever, in that it hasn't been a vacation. I mean, we both have worked. All we did was move locations from Pennsylvania.
You got a new computer and
yeah, we just moved locations. I come down here, I play golf. I have not played golf. I've been here since Monday last week. Have not played a single round of golf. I've gone to hit golf balls 3 or 4 times. I've ridden my bike. I've gone to the ocean. I've got to watch the sun come up. But all I did was move locations.
So where are you? What beach are you? Tell them where you are.
We're in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It's absolutely gorgeous, and we've had beautiful skies, beautiful days. I think one evening we had rain that went through the evening into the morning, but other than that, it's been absolutely beautiful every single day. We're here till Friday, so we head out of here Friday morning and head back to Pennsylvania. But it's been actually beautiful. It hasn't felt like a vacation. It just felt like I just moved locations. Is all I did. But if you're going to move locations, it's been pretty, so you can't complain too much. Yeah, it's like living the life of Chip Cooper. That's what it's like.
I work, but I can see the ocean out there. So anyway.
Yeah.
All right. So let me get back to share my screen, and I hope you can see me there now. You can see me, Alan, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the title there, and really, that title presents what I call the $64 question: is your website regulated by the Americans for Disability Act? That's what we're going to be talking about briefly in this presentation. And there's been a lot of litigation over the last 5 years or so in this area involving website lawsuits against websites because they're not ADA compliant. And I've been looking for probably the most appropriate time to introduce our FTC Guardian members to this issue. But it just didn't seem that we had any real answers, and we still do not. But the reason I've chosen this time to present this presentation is that last year, as we'll see in a slide here toward the end of this presentation, there was a huge uptick in litigation here regarding websites, plaintiffs suing because of the alleged non-compliance with ADA. So because of the huge uptick, and despite the fact we don't have really definitive answers, it's probably a good time to address this question. So here we go. We're going to get down to it. You've seen that housekeeping announcement many times. So it's all about website or ADA compliance for websites. So in a nutshell, what is the ADA? It's an acronym for the Americans with Disabilities Act, passed back in 1990, and that's a brief description there. It's a civil rights law that protects or prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in all areas of public life. And you see highlighted in yellow there, involving the public and private places that are open to the general public. So that maybe gives you a little bit of a clue as to whether websites are regulated, because the question would be, is your website business a place that is open to the general public by virtue of being on the internet, right? That's why we're talking about this. And again, drilling down a little bit more into ADA about what it does in fact regulate, again, prohibits discrimination against people that are limited by major life activities. And you see highlighted in yellow there too, that could really be significant if websites are viewed as places of public accommodation. And that would be reading and seeing, because if you are visually impaired, then your website may not be able to assist someone who is visually impaired in reading your website. That's really what we're talking about here. So as we continue to drill down a little bit deeper into whether or not ADA applies to our websites, we get to this really the key issue. What is a place of public accommodation? Because they are regulated by ADA. And you see at the bottom, again in yellow, retail stores and other sales or rental establishments. You know, again, does that really apply to websites? Well, it seems like it's getting fairly close there. So we continue to move on. And to show you how simple and easy it is for a plaintiff to make a claim based on an ADA discrimination, it's really only 3 elements that the plaintiff must allege to be successful. First of all, he or she has to prove that he or she is disabled per the ADA definitions. I think that's fairly clear cut. Number 2, that the defendant, which would be you in this case, you operate a place of public accommodation. And again, the question is a website a commercial website a place of public accommodation, and that you discriminated against this individual by denying full and equal opportunity to enjoy your website services. So pretty easy. And now we get down to the ultimate question here, the $64 question that I raised at the beginning of the presentation, and that is, does ADA apply to websites? Now, if you look very carefully at these 3 points, this presentation here with these 3 points presents sort of a spectrum, because the lawsuits and the liability it really stretches across this presentation. So if you look at item number 1 there, this would be on one end of the spectrum, which is that ADA applies only to brick and mortar places. So if you've got a brick and mortar store or business there and this physical building of some sort, then the ADA would only apply to that. So that would probably eliminate a lot of our audience. But some of our audience actually have brick and mortar stores or places, so they may be very much regulated. Then if you go down to number 3 on the other end of the spectrum, ADA applies to all commercial websites. That would apply to virtually all, if not all, of our members, if that were the case. But and there are cases that take the position indicated by number 1 and number 3. In other words, each end of the spectrum. Now you can see in the right margin that the prevailing view right now, and we're going to have a lot more development in the future, but right now the prevailing view is in the middle, number 2, that indicates that the ADA only applies to websites operated in connection with brick and mortar places. And you see the 2 bullets there, Facebook escaped liability in 2011 because apparently it didn't have a connection to a brick and mortar place, place of public accommodation. But you see in the second bullet there, Target and Home Depot did not, because they very definitely have very public stores, buildings that people can visit. In fact, I was in Home Depot over the weekend here. They also have websites. So you can see Facebook escaped liability under this theory number 2, but Target and Home Depot did not. So that's where most of the liability falls, not only for brick and mortar and not all commercial websites, but number 2, where you have a combination of a brick and mortar outfit or outlet that's tied to a website. That's where most of it is. And it's really important to understand where you are here at the present time with respect to potential liability, because the consequences of such a lawsuit can be really significant. Legal fees are astronomical, like $25,000 and up. They can also be Department of Justice civil fines and penalties, but most of these lawsuits are settled. And I will say right now that most of these lawsuits are not against small businesses, because the vast majority are known as class action lawsuits, where an individual who is disabled, and you think back to the three elements we talked about just a minute ago, files a claim on behalf with an attorney, and then they seek to join into a class a lot of other people who are similarly situated. So if you are a plaintiff's trial attorney, the more people you can get to join your class, the bigger your legal fee is going to be. So the targets then, generally speaking, are large companies. And you've just seen a couple of examples on the prior slide. And most of these are settled. So there's not an adjudication, a case that's been tried out and maybe a jury trial where there's a verdict, and you can then get some guidance from this adjudication to guide other businesses which are very concerned about whether they are regulated. And if you recall, at the very outset of this transaction, I indicated that there was a huge uptick in ADA litigation last year, 2018, involving websites. And you can see in 2017, there were 814 cases. In 2018, 2,285 cases, a 181% increase. So because of this, I felt like it's time, or generally speaking, probably time to present it to our members. However, I waited a little longer, hoping there would be more definitive guidance instead of those three positions we just mentioned a few minutes ago. And you can see here the top 5 industries that are involved in the litigation are retail. And I guess in a general way, that would apply to most, if not all, of our members. And here is a classic example, Bishop versus Amazon. Earlier this year, the plaintiff Cedric Bishop, a legally blind Amazon user, filed suit in the New York U.S. District Court. And I think it's interesting to see, generally speaking, what the claims were. And they're underlined here in yellow. And essentially the claims were, or centered on the fact, or the allegation, that Amazon's website was inaccessible to blind and visually impaired people. But if you look at the next 2 underlined text, you'll see specifically a little bit about what these lawsuits are really about. And here the allegation was, in the second one, that Amazon.com doesn't provide a text alternative for non-text content on its website. For example, images. There's nothing there that might describe to a person who is visually impaired what the image is or what it's about. That's one claim. And then the other one you see in the next bullet, that the website has no equivalent text for title frames and scripts. Again, you might understand that someone who is visually impaired would need some sort of explanatory text for title frames and scripts on a lawsuit. And then you see the real hook that got this case into court was that the claim that this particular plaintiff, who was visually impaired, was not only not able to effectively use Amazon's website, but also not able to actually or effectively access Amazon's Whole Foods stores. So now we see the tie-in between a website and a physical store location. And that, of course, is what, where we are in the second of the 3 approaches to this type of liability. And we see here that the resolution was that the case was settled. It was a class action case against a huge company, Amazon. But you also can see at the very top that the plaintiff wanted Amazon to make its website conform to the ADA in the form of compliance with something known as WCAG, WCAG. A little bit about that in just a minute or so. But obviously what this really means is, if you really think about it, if ADA is really applied uniformly across all technologies, it's going to cover almost everything: cell phones, televisions, a lot of things. And also, if you look and expand the types of disabilities that you have: hearing, cognitive, neurological, physical, speech, and of course, visual, where I think most of the litigation has centered to date. So the scope of this type of liability is fairly significant. So here's the question, sort of the follow-up to whether your website is actually regulated by ADA. If you think it is, or you're not sure, and you want to check your website to give a test to evaluate whether it's deficient and to identify areas that you need to improve, you can get, if you are a WordPress website, which a lot of our members have, there's a plug-in here indicating that you can actually do an effective check or evaluation of your website to see areas that you might need to improve. Now, the last big takeaway here, I guess, before we get to the final list of takeaways, is that the gold standard for accessibility is this Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, known as we mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, WCAG, and the current version is WCAG 2.1. This is the gold standard. And there's been a lot of question about whether compliance with ADA requires compliance with WCAG, or if you're obligated to comply, will you be okay if you comply but not quite up to WCAG standards? That's been another question, and there's been a lot of concern by a lot of parties seeking guidance to this question and other related ones. And you see here, back in 2018, last year, specifically September 25th, the Attorney General's office sent a letter, in this particular case, to a Representative Ted Budd, who had been begging for some guidance from the Department of Justice, specifically the Office of the Attorney General. And the basic message is indicated in yellow there, that the Department of Justice will not issue regulations regarding website accessibility at this time. So a lot of people were really concerned that we didn't have specific regulations about at least the question, is WCAG compliance really required if you're required to comply with ADA? That's one of the big ones. So here are the basic takeaways of this letter, very important. And it says in the first bullet that the ADA does apply to websites, as a number of cases have indicated, even if the Department of Justice is not issuing specific regulations. They're clearly stating that ADA does apply. Well, we sort of know that. What we want to know is specifically, what does that really mean? In the third bullet, organizations have a little flexibility in deciding how to make their websites accessible. Well, we all know that too. We have flexibility, but we need more guidance. But you see there at the end of that third bullet, but in most cases, working to meet WCAG will be the best strategy, but it's not a requirement. So we know right now from the DOJ that WCAG compliance is the best strategy, but it's not absolutely required. And then the final takeaway is that litigation is going to continue to increase because we're really not sure. The law is very unsettled. So if we look at the overall takeaways for this presentation, we see number one, ADA, of course, prevents discrimination against individuals with disabilities. And we know in the second bullet, we've just seen that websites are subject to regulation by ADA, but the extent of the law is really unsettled right now. There's still a lot of confusion, but the prevailing view, very important, is that ADA only applies at this time to websites that are associated with brick and mortar businesses. So really, if all you have is a website but not an associated brick and mortar business, you probably are going to be okay, especially if you're a really small business, because the class action lawsuits that seem to be the rage these days are really, you're just not going to be the appropriate target for a class action lawsuit. It's going to be a much bigger company. And the last takeaway for websites that are regulated at present, WCAG is not a legal requirement, but it's generally viewed as the best solution. So the tags that I'm going to add tomorrow morning are Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, website accessibility, disability, web content accessibility guidelines, and WCAG. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. There's Alan. So I guess we've got a little bit of a delay before we have questions, but I believe that gives you the best summary that we can give you at this point, not having more specific guidelines from either the courts from litigated cases, because most are settled, or from the Department of Justice.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
what do you
guys,
think?
yeah, we don't have any questions going on right now. Let me just, because I know there's going to be a time delay in these, and since I'm working from one monitor versus two, it's a little bit more difficult. You know, most of our members, probably 2/3 of our members, are website only members. There's another third that they do both. Um, the 2/3 probably don't have a lot to worry about because they're none of them are on Amazon or a Walmart or whatever. Um, on the other hand, I do think that it's something that you need to put in the back of your hat, and you start thinking about, because there's going to come a time where someone's going to you're going to need to do it, right? So if you're redeveloping your site, if you're starting to look into doing stuff like that, then I think that you should probably at least put it in the back of your mind that I want to do some of these things moving forward, because in a couple of years it's just going to be higher profile, right? I mean,
And the area of concern would be, suppose you're a restaurant or a pizza shop or some other small business that has obviously a retail location, jewelry store, for example. These are classic examples of small businesses with very definitely a retail location. And certainly, I think every pizza shop in the United States has a website, many of which facilitate ordering a pizza and then you go by and pick it up, right? So,
yeah,
so right now you fall in that middle area that seems to be indicating that you have some issues. On the other hand, you're a very small business in relation to these big ones Alan just mentioned. So even though you may be technically in that middle area where you should really seriously consider some kind of upgrade to your website, the chances of your being nailed right now, at least, are slim. But we wanted to get this out right now so that you understand exactly what the issues are right now. And then in the future, we'll give some updates that might be more applicable, not only to the small local businesses, but to the website only businesses as well.
Yeah. And Arlene asked a question about businesses like, say, for example, a carpet cleaner that pretty much use a website and a telephone. They don't really have an office. I think you're pretty much in the middle. I mean, because you're a service business, but you're a local business, so you're kind of in the middle. You may not have an office people come to, but you're in that middle ground where you're probably okay for now. But if you're growing your business and you're redeveloping your website at some point, you definitely want to take the steps to make it right and moving into the future for sure.
Yeah, well, let me add to that. Let's say you're essentially a home-based business. When you've got a home office, you've got a phone, and your customers call you up, truck goes out and does work on premises of the customer. If that's the case, I think you're probably not regulated at this time, because your customers don't come to your house to see you.
Yep.
They go to your website or they call you up on the phone. The place of public accommodation is more where people actually walk into a store, actually visit the premises. If that's the situation, like a restaurant, a pizza shop, then you're really in a much more situation where you need to be careful. But if you're basically what was just described there, a home office and a telephone and no customers come in, then you're pretty safe, I think, right now, at least, until we know more.
Yep. And see, Mary, by now, shouldn't all website creation software, not everybody has it. I would, look at the software that Chip talked about, and just, check your own website out and stuff like that. And then we have another question from Daleen. And if you use Amazon for selling books and ebooks, does this affect the authors? I think what you have to do is watch Amazon, because if Amazon has to settle a handful of cases, they're going to make you start developing your books in other formats for ADA compliance.
Yeah,
I mean,
and let me add to that. I have one particular client, a large client, that has a SaaS service, right? And its customers are big corporations, and some of them are universities, even, or university hospitals, which are part of University of pick a state, right? And and of course, the university customer of my client is a place of public accommodation. People go there, live there in dormitories, right? And and so they have to be fully ADA compliant with the ramps for wheelchairs and everything else that you might imagine that you see every day in terms of ADA compliance. So because the university is regulated and has gone to a lot of great lengths to make sure that they're ADA compliant, many of them have adopted this policy that all of their service providers need to be ADA compliant too. And my client doesn't have a place of public accommodation, right, that I see. So I don't think they have one. So now they're under pressure from their customer, as Alan mentioned, to do something that they are by themselves not obligated to do, but some of their biggest customers are sort of pushing it on them, right? So you may start seeing something like that develop because it is a trend and it's not going to stop. It's going to grow. The question is to what extent. So we're seeing that kind of push right now for ADA compliance in this one particular area where there's no legal obligation to do it. But if you want the business of the state university, then you're probably going to have to do something. So we're going to keep you informed as things develop.
Yeah. And I would see Amazon doing things like promoting books higher if they are ADA compliant, right? They're gonna push those books higher. If you can publish a book that also includes an audio, or if you publish a book that also includes, I don't know, whether it's Braille or something like that can be printed out, or I don't know how it works. But if you can do something like that, then I can see Amazon is adding it as a feature to go and look, we're going to push those authors to the top because these books are ADA compliant and stuff like that, So it may be something to look into in the future, for sure.
All right.
That's all we have.
Okay, guys, we
good.
appreciate your time and attention, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the end of the month. Have a very pleasant evening.
Take care. Bye-bye.